Welcome to AgriUT Conversations podcast. Welcome to AgriUT Conversations podcast, a space where inspirational leaders meet to discuss challenges and solutions our planet and its people face today. We intend to capture these conversations to increase awareness, encourage engagement, and inspire others to follow in the steps of these leaders striving to make the world a better place. Today, I have the honor of hosting Masego Mbaakanyi, an African entrepreneur with a mission to grow sustainable industries across the African continent, which empower and uplift Africans. Masego is particularly passionate about how fintech and renewable energy can transform Africa, and she's got extensive experience in sustainable industries, fintech, and business leadership, and is an outstanding advocate for entrepreneurs and organizations focused on uplifting the African people through new technology. I could go through a whole list of accomplishments because Masego's bio is absolutely incredible. So now it's my pleasure to welcome you. Hi, Masego. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Carmen. That was quite the intro.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
It's always a very formal intro from the LinkedIn introduction. So my favorite part of these calls is starting with the question of tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Cool. I don't think my intention was necessarily to fall into these industries. A lot of it was based on circumstance and opportunities that presented themselves. My family runs a business in franchising, and so I think I saw a lot of how can I say loopholes, not loopholes, more than gaps in the supply chains that were operated. That made me question whether the systems that we currently use actually make sense, and whether or not, it's feasible to continue along these business lines. One of them being in fossil fuels. I mean, that was a bit of a no-brainer that that's probably not going to be sustainable in the long run. But then even in the retail side of it, I mean, when I say retail, I mean the FMCG side of it, which we also operate. I think the other question that I was concerned with was surrounding payments. And I think then it extended beyond just our business operations, but to everyday people. You go visit your grandmother in the villages and you realize, how, I don't want to say backward, but for lack of a better word, how much they were lacking in terms of technology that could make things convenient. So yes, mobile money has been massively useful, at least in Botswana it was, but in South Africa, there has not been that kind of adoption of mobile money. So, you see all these gaps within financial technology, specifically the payments, and then you go from looking at payments to then looking at other aspects that fall under financial technology. And then as an ecosystem, you ask yourself, okay, the placement of the incumbents, why are they so slow to adopt to some of these technologies? Well, because there's nobody enforcing it. Okay, why aren't the regulators enforcing it? Well, because it doesn't affect financial stability and price stability. So why would they really care? And so on and so forth. So it's things that came from asking questions based on inconveniences that I would have and inconveniences that I would see with other people that made me think, no, that there has to be a better way. And of course, the other aspect is traveling and seeing, you go to the UK or wherever in Europe and you realize, wait, this is possible? Why aren't we doing this? So it's all these things that led me to where I am now. And, like I said, I've met some really great people from the African FinTech Network, as an example, being able to interact with FinTech association leaders in various countries, seeing what they're doing. All of these things influence, my ability to learn and grow and develop my interest in fintech in particular. And like I said, with renewables, it was just a no-brainer because load shedding. If anybody's ever heard of that, there's this wonderful thing in both Botswana and South Africa where the government decides that they're just going to shut off the power in order to manage their loads of demand. And thus many businesses have suffered as a result of that, which obviously includes jobs also being lost as a result of that. So yeah, I could go on, but I think it was just opening my eyes and realizing, gosh, these are serious issues that affect people's day-to-day ability to live, operate, basics. So yeah, that's how I ended up where I am.
I love it how your curiosity of making the world a better place has driven you into these different industries. And yeah, you've learned a lot along the way. And I think one topic that's very relevant in today's society and for this podcast series is the challenges that last mile people and women face when it comes to financial inclusion. There's so many barriers that exist, and I know that's a topic you're very passionate about, so maybe we can dive into that a little bit, just starting with the overview of what are the challenges and barriers to financial inclusion for women, especially in the last mile.
Sure. I think I'm going to be very specific in talking about what I've observed and learned from the African continent. However, I don't believe that it's just specific to our continent. I think a lot of what I'm about to say will apply to many other developing countries and regions around the world. So one of the main challenges of women is cultural based issues. So, the man leads the house and the woman follows. There's always been this saying that the man is the head, the woman is the neck, so on and so forth. But that's fine, obviously. But I think the issue comes when we speak of independence of financing. So what we found with mobile money data in specific was that a lot more of the SIM cards that were registered to men, even though a woman would be using that cell phone, that particular device. And so it takes a lot of power and independence to make certain decisions. So even with women farmers, you'll see that the money goes into their mobile money account, or women vendors, the money goes into their mobile money account, but the man then dictates how that money is dispersed. Because and the idea was, well, typically women, when they get money, and this is a major stereotype, and I apologize to my male counterparts, please don't take offense. But typically what you'd find is women would be more concerned about the household affairs. Okay, what are we going to eat? Do the children have, shoes and, school fees and this and that? Whereas the man, some of them would be focused on trying to build their operations, and then others, it would be more leisurely. So, hey, this is now a bit of drinking money for me, and so on and so forth. So again, I'm not trying to generalize, but I'm trying to get the viewers to pay attention to the nuanced issues pertaining to culture, of, man being head of house, woman being under the man, and thus not having control of her financing. And it goes to the extent that the husband would only allow, so from savings groups, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but it's the equivalent, I suppose, of some sort of a cooperative, like credit union that, they have in the States, and I guess in Australia as well, where, it's like a joint savings type situation. But the man would only allow the woman to do it if it's within a known church group or a group of women. Like it cannot just be some random group that she finds type of thing. And this is, I'm generalizing, but I'm also saying that this is typical of what you are likely to see with women entrepreneurs across the continent. So there's those cultural constraints that then affects delivery of the money to the recipient being the woman at the last mile. So that's just one of the issues that I can name. And then there's other issues depending on the country, which is, digital ID. If you don't have an ID, you can't get a bank account. I mean, it's just that simple. You are unbankable. You cannot get credit. You cannot get insurance. All the things that are used as a means to uplift your standard of living, be it investments and so on and so forth, you don't have access to that. And then the last one is the lack of financial literacy, and to an extent, even digital literacy, but more so financial literacy in this instance. So those are just some of the issues that, I've seen from my observation across the continent. And it's not a lack of ability. It's just a lack of appropriate access to information.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. It's access to information, and then also sometimes to tools and, digital tools. Exactly. or physical tools that enable them to achieve a different, level and state that they're in.
100%.
And I think there's a lot of companies, so AgriUT Foundation is one from a foundation perspective. There's AgriUT. There's so many other companies out there trying to deliver this, but it's a challenge. It's really hard because I think a lot of companies are failing to look at those cultural barriers. And at a core, how do you support a community change the way that they operate? With technology is not actually going to do that. There's a whole lot of other things that need to happen to facilitate the situation, that technology that can be used to their benefit.
Exactly. I mean, I think the cultural and social aspects I just think they're impossible to change at this juncture. It is the head of the house is the man. It's just that simple. You cannot change something that's been ingrained generations in women. You know what I mean? And mind you, not everybody sees that as necessarily a bad thing, which is also fine. You know what I mean? Like the gender role thing. And by the way, in this instance, I am not speaking about, the non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. I'm only going to speak on the two genders.
Yeah, we'll keep
and
it
those
simple.
who identify as such. Yeah. So at this juncture, I just don't see that as something that it's a systematic thing that cannot be changed. But what can be done, I suppose, to some extent, is the ability to expose people so that even if they don't have the opportunity to choose necessarily as yet, at least they are aware of the possibility, which is enough of a seed for a person to then think, oh, okay, so this is possible. I can manage my own money. I am able to do this. And there is a reason why I'm doing this. It makes sense. You know what I mean? Even though I am expected to, give the money and then get back whatever it is that I'm meant to get back according to my husband, at least I'm aware enough that, well, it is the money that I've earned, and this is how much I need to spend to take care of my family. This is how much I'd like to save for myself. Maybe it can open up a discussion. I mean, I don't know women's individual situations in their households, but it's just to make you aware of what is possible. And I think even in there was a case study done in India with I think it was Grameen Bank. I think the way it was started was with that intention to empower women, at the so-called bottom of the pyramid, to be able to make those decisions. Because there's something else we don't consider is those women who rely on their husbands. When their husbands die, the option, you kind of have to buckle up either way. So, would you rather buckle up when it's difficult for you to do so because everything is falling apart in your life? Or would you rather have somewhat of a contingency for in the event that, then at least I have some grounding and some understanding of what is possible for me and for my family and so on and so forth. So yeah, like I said, the social aspects unlikely to change. What you can do, as you said, is make them better farmers so they can earn more money. And then if 60% of $100 is 60, but and 60% of $200 is 120. So you take back more when you earn more, type of thing. The absolute amount gets bigger. So even if you do have to give away a large chunk to your husband, if you make more, you will still have more in absolute terms. So I think that would be the game changer. So how do we make them efficient farmers? How do we teach them how to run businesses more efficiently, more effectively? You know what I mean? So those are the things that I think, AgUnity and AgriUT can assist with for these women farmers, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And so many other companies out there that are also providing brilliant services in terms of education around how best to handle their crops, access to machinery and inputs that can help them improve their yields. Like there's so many things out there. So the more and more you support them to have the tools that they need to work better and, operate better in their micro businesses, that then will provide a solid foundation for the next steps. And then you can, focus on education and access and all of those terms. I'm interested to take this in the direction now of, so we've identified the challenges and we can see that, there's a lot of complex parts to this puzzle if you want to solve the issue of financial inclusion. But mobile money and, the next topic, tokens, and this whole Web3 and blockchain world that's coming in, what do you think its role is in facilitating this, attainment of financial inclusion?
I think technology is a massive, massive contributor to the upliftment of many societies all around. More so for people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. It just facilitates their ability to leapfrog in ways that were not previously possible. Of course, there's a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of things that are required in order to provide access to those tools. So one of the things that I would say, obviously not in the instance of AgriUT, but typically, if you do anything that requires internet, you need the infrastructure available. You know what I mean? And so you as a private company cannot build infrastructure for an entire area. It's not feasible. So you're relying on the infrastructure that's been provided by the mobile operators or the fiber providers and so on and so forth, which is typically government, like the backbone providers. And that determines the rollout of a lot of these technologies because they rely on those types of systems. So I think if that is right, and there's a checkbox on that, and there's a minimum availability, then the next step is obviously the affordability of the devices themselves. And once again, I think AgriUT has done wonders in terms of being able to kill a lot of those issues. So it's kind of a checklist that's been sorted in that instance. But those are part of the bottlenecks that a lot of the technology providers couldn't overcome, so to speak. Web3?
That's like a whole nother topic.
Yeah. I gotta be honest, I myself, I'm still trying to figure Web3 out because where I've seen Web3 most applicable is with, oh my gosh, the future is virtual. So you can be on vacation with your friend using, the virtual reality glasses, blah, blah. And I'm like, but I mean, I
Humans.
get it,
Humans.
but this is a developed world problem.
Yeah.
It's not. It's no. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a developing world issue. We are not up in arms because we don't have VR glasses. I can guarantee you that much. You know, we got way more problems to worry about than that.
But
So
putting it in the circumstances, allowing a buyer of commodities from Japan or Australia to be able to virtually visit the farms or get updates, or, you know, not, I know that, like, not necessarily from the farmer side, like them jumping on and saying hi inside. That's like, you know, that's like a whole next level of infrastructure required for that. But I think there are some amazing use cases, and the narrative starting to change around this whole idea of Web3 for good, and it's not just virtual holidays with your friends or playing sports or whatever it is, which are really, you know, they're great entertainment tools and stuff. But I think there's a nice shift towards how we use these technologies in a way that can actually impact these communities, but really important to, like, not let them be too techified. That's not even a word, but you know, like we would,
I'll take it.
I think it's important to, like, have the boundaries of, like, how far we take this to these communities. But okay, so Web3, no, that's like a whole nother world. In specific, mobile money, and I'd say in the token situation, you know, with AgriUT Foundation, the entire system and concept is that consumers can reward these farmers and say thank you to them for the hard work that they put in, and do that without any fees and directly get to them, and they can use these tokens in a way that can be exchanged for goods or services, or even for community projects, you know, building schools, hospitals. I think that concept of being able for me to say thank you to my farmer for this coffee or my chocolate or whatever is amazing. And the ability for these farmers to get a bit more extra on top of what they, you know, currently get, which is small, that plays a big role. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know you've got, we spoke the last time around regulatory considerations and how you introduce it to the communities. So over to you and your brain on this topic.
Sure. I think there's no question that rewarding a farmer for their work above and beyond, you know, what they get from selling their crop yield and so on and so forth it's so pertinent, and it's brilliant in and of itself. From a feel-good perspective, both from the buyer of the end sort of product, the coffee, as well as for the farmer to know that, oh my gosh, somebody all the way in Australia actually appreciates the coffee beans that I've labored. You know what I mean? It's actually worth it to know that somebody appreciates my hard work. So from a feel-good perspective, brilliant. And the ability to reward from a monetary perspective is also fantastic, in the sense that if I can exchange those rewards for equipment to make me more efficient, that's fantastic. I mean, that it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. It's fantastic. Where I was speaking about regulatory issues was in the context of, yes, they can spend these tokens and rewards within the marketplace. However, the AgriUT marketplace. However, if you were to exchange that for fiat, or you were to use those tokens in order to pay for groceries or school fees, etc., that is where the regulatory aspect now comes into play. And two aspects, not so much for the provider of the tokens, but more so for the vendors themselves, because you then need to justify why you are accepting the token, utility token, to pay for groceries. You understand? So that's one of the hurdles that I think would come up, because the truth of the matter is most people would like money, more money, obviously, but they also want the freedom to be able to spend it on whatever they want. So yes, I can buy more equipment, which is great. Yes, I can buy more irrigation systems and so on and so forth. But what I really, really need is to buy my daughter a pair of school shoes. What I really, really need is to buy my daughter school uniform or pay for her school fees or, take my mom to the hospital or whatever the case may be. That's what I really, really need. And so that is where the difficulty, I think, would come into play from a regulatory perspective. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think, when I've spoken to regulators, both in South Africa and Botswana, about, crypto payments, I'm a business owner, and me accepting Bitcoin obviously is, it would be ridiculous for me to accept Bitcoin from anybody to pay for fuel or a burger or whatever, just because today what it's worth will not be the same tomorrow. But the concept of being able to accept stable coins as an example, that was, no, you will affect the price stability and financial, you know what I mean? So the conversations with the regulators is completely different, And then the other aspect of it is most of them are now talking about CBDC. So are you going to compete with the central bank digital currency? How would that work?
So what if we take it a step back, and it's because it's not a digital currency, it's a utility token that's created specifically for a purpose, which is to enable the communities to be able to purchase things that are useful to them. And it's the equivalent of a reward system, like a loyalty system that, when you got Qantas frequent flyers or whatever it is, to be able to collect those, redeem them. And then when they redeem them, the vendors are able to exchange that for the local currency. So that overcomes the regulators being worried about losing their value. The vendors know how to use it. The farmers are benefiting from it as a loyalty system for their produce. Do you think that that ecosystem is less scary for the regulators and for government people?
There's no doubt that, pitching it more as a loyalty system would be a safer bet. But I am certain that the hurdle of convincing these regulators that indeed, because remember, the truth of the matter is utility token, crypto payment, one and the same thing.
To them,
You know what I mean? We're not dealing with, Estonian government or Swedish government or European. No, we're talking about countries that digitization is EFT payments. So when you start talking about using anything outside of but actually you raise a very interesting point, because there's this thing that a bank a lot of the banks in South Africa use called, it's an FNB, First National Bank. It's called e-bucks. So you can use your e-bucks to buy flights, to buy, I don't know, groceries or fuel. I know for sure you can buy fuel and so on and so forth. But I don't know where that line is drawn. And the other thing is they are a bank. So they are heavily regulated by the central bank. So I think they get a little bit more scope because the bank has that much input and they have that much transparency into the banks. Now, as a technology platform, I don't know. I don't know to what extent you can get away with that. You see, so there would be massive education that would have to come into play, and just slow convincing. And the most important narrative you'd have to take is but this is how it benefits your people. We don't benefit from any of these transactions. We're not getting, a fee from conversion or whatever the case may
It's
be.
not
Maybe
a
you are.
commercial entity.
Yes.
It's an entity set up to truly support the community, move value within them, not for the entity to make money, which is why it's so important to have a foundation entity facilitate this, because they're very strictly run by the board. They've got the constitution, there's control over how it's used, and it's done for alleviating poverty and distress in these communities.
100%. Yes. So I think that would be, if you can do a use case to justify the loyalty aspect via the e-bucks or comparison to e-bucks and things like that, that could work. And then using it from a foundation perspective, because the other question is, when you convert, assume that, now vendors want to accept, you can pay for school fees, so the schools are willing to accept the utility token, when you convert it to fiat, because I'm sure the schools want to convert it to fiat, what is that cost of conversion? Who is the provider that converts it? And the other selling point would be, and I don't know how it would work, but whoever who converts it needs to be willing to do it for next to nothing. Because otherwise it completely defeats the purpose. It should almost be cheaper than the mobile money transaction costs, which are very high, by the way, relatively speaking. You know what I mean? And yet people still use them. So if you can do it for cheaper, okay, now we're talking. But then the other question I have to ask is, if the provider decides, no, actually, I'm going to accept the tokens and I'll convert them at my own time with whichever providers I want to convert them with. Basically, you extend the reach of these tokens. So it's no longer just within the farmer's ecosystem. Exactly. Then what happens? Is there a restriction on, because it's a loyalty system, right? So
no, I think as soon as that happens, that crosses the line from utility to security, and has a whole nother set of rules around that, because then that's the general economic system, that it's entering. These use cases especially with the AgriUT token, something I've liked from the beginning is that it's for specific circumstances and communities that struggle to connect and access certain goods and services, and that reliance on cash really impacts them. So you need to find a system that, this adds value, and that when they accept it, it gets converted. It's a very good point around how much, to make sure that's as low as possible. But then that works, because then the cash conversion still occurs. You're not rubbing anyone up the wrong way in terms of the regulatory approach. We're not here to try and change the whole economic system. This is a specific case of this community of, whether it's 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 farmers that live in this area struggle with certain things. And this is a way for them to have basic needs looked after, from education, school, food, and housing, so that they can thrive in their community, and then create, the better they get, the better their businesses get, the better the economy gets, the better everything moves towards if they do that. I
mean, the other thing to really take into consideration is that the assumption is the rewards are not a majority of your income in the first place. So is it really something to seriously, worry about? I'm not sure, because you can easily say, well, look, yes, you get rewarded around the world, but it cannot be 50%. It cannot be more than what you make from what you yield. So what you make from what you yield is your primary, income base to pay for your school fees, to pay for this and that, because that is your real cash conversion there. And then instead of using cash to buy equipment, why don't you use the reward? You know what I mean? So maybe that aspect is a little bit better than trying to convince, unless you put the vendors on the marketplace as well, which is also great. that works. To try to get an individual vendor that has nothing to do with the supply chain to then accept the utility token, I don't think that's a worthwhile exercise for the amount that these people will be getting in terms of rewards relative to their income. So maybe there's another point to consider that, is regulatory issues really going to be an issue? You go to the regulator. Yeah.
I think as long as you don't let the commercial elements that you've raised come into it, then no. As long as it purely is the intention and the utility of this ecosystem that's trying to be created, then the regulatory stuff becomes, something not to be concerned about. But it's a fine line, right? Because that it is exchanging value. There's value being exchanged, and so it's a fine line of managing that. But I think it's possible with the right structure, and enhancement of what AgriUT Foundation has started as well. I could talk for ages. Sorry, go. Continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the last part, which I think AgriUT has done really well from what I've seen as well, is getting the right sort of vendors on your marketplace that'll provide worthwhile equipment that farmers don't say, well, I could get this equipment, cheaper or better from, such and such a place. I think that is also a game changer. So basically getting the best vendors anyways at the best price so that they end up exchanging those tokens on the marketplace anyway. So I think it's fantastic what AgriUT is doing, and I'm excited for what the foundation is going to do and has done. So I'm very excited to be part of the team, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can help more people and bring impact, especially to women around the world.
Definitely. And I think the addition of you, welcome to the board of the AgriUT Foundation board. The addition over there is going to bring such a nice perspective and knowledge layer to the existing board members. I think just to wrap up, because we could talk for ages, I hope we get an opportunity to have more conversations on different topics. But just as a wrap up of, so we've identified the challenges. We know that there is some solutions and these pathways that we can start overcoming some of these challenges to financial inclusion for women. What would be the advice you gave to anyone working in this space that might be listening, that is working with women, but also any gender, work that are farmers, that are in the last mile, or they live in remote and rural regions around Africa and Asia and other parts of the world? What would be the one piece of advice you would give them in their approach to trying to solve the issues in these communities?
You cannot solve their problems remotely. Do not assume that what works in this place will necessarily work in that place unless you have been on the ground to talk to these people, to understand their issues. You cannot plug and play solutions from the developed world into the developing world. It will never and has never worked. You need to customize or create solutions directly given to you by the problems that these people tell you they have. And I think that would be my major piece of advice. Get on the ground and hear people's stories and hear what they have to say.
I love it. That is the best piece of advice. Nirvitria, the program director of AgriUT, said this similar thing around the wisdom of these communities and these humans is incredible. And if you learn from their wisdom and use that to guide how, you want to propose a technology solution or anything else to help, you're going to have much better success. So that is the 100%. Best piece of advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. There's still so many things I want to ask, but for next time, thank you to all our listeners for listening in. The next episode, we're going to talk about carbon credits and some use cases for AgriUT Foundation in that space. So I think you'll be interested in that one with your sustainability passion and the load shedding that you experience in Johannesburg. But thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and look forward to speaking again on a future episode, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Can't wait to be invited again.
Yes, you're on the list. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.